everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today, part 3, and hopefully the final part of Televangelists. As much as I love goofing on these goofballs, it's time for a change. So this will be the final installment in my Televangelist videos, and then we will be moving on to Killer Kids. So, interesting week coming up, I'll tell you. I am back in my normal filming habitat, so we're back from Chattanooga. The show went really well. As soon as I get the video footage from that, I will upload it for you. Well, confession, while I was on vacation, I did stray from the keto diet a lot. We did a lot of Uber Eats, and you can't always get healthy things delivered, so yeah, I ate pizza, I ate tacos, I ate ice cream, things that I shouldn't. Pretty sure I puffed up a little bit, but I've been back on my 𝗙𝗶𝗁 journey for a week now. Feel much better because all that junk really does make you feel like crap. I learned that the hard way. So yeah, back on track. Everything's back on track. So it's time for us to delve back into normal videos in our normal setting. Last week we ended off with Robert Jeffries and Franklin Graham. Today we are delving into what I consider the big three of this series, Junior and Senior Falwell, as well as Joyce Meyer, who's the only female to make an appearance on this list. That was not by design, but it was just kind of how it happened, because I've also covered her in a previous video. I just wanted to delve back into her. So that's what we're studying today. So if this is your first time, welcome. We do true crime, weird history, and occasionally keto or weight loss journey here. We also have a lot of fun. If you'd like to join my patrons or my channel members, those links are down below. If I have not earned your subscription, I hope today is the day that I do. Please hit that button, hit the bell, hit a like button, anything to get the channel into the algorithm. I have a yearly goal this year of getting us to 10,000 community strong by December. So we are working on that, and thank you so much. Also, you'll notice some changes, redoing my thumbnails on a lot of the old videos, really trying to make it a nice place for everybody to visit. So maybe doing a Facebook page, maybe a Discord. I don't want to promise too much, because with my day commitments, sometimes I'm a little lax where I should be. My patrons can tell you that, and I just want to say I'm sorry. I will make up for that. This year, I will make up for that, and I'm sorry. But without further ado, big shout out to my patrons and my channel members. Let's jump in with Jerry Falwell Sr.
Eagles don't prepare. We say, the Old Testament, and in the Living Bible it says that white hair is the crowning glory and is seen most amongst the godly.
Jerry Lamont Falwell Sr. was born August 11th, 1933.
The first time that we've been attacked on our soil. First time, and by far, the worst results. And I fear, as Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, said yesterday, that this is only the beginning, and with biological warfare available to these monsters, the Husseins, the Bin Ladens, the Arafats, what we saw on Tuesday, as terrible as it is, could be minuscule if in fact God continues to lift the curtain and allow the enemies of America to give us probably what we deserve.
In near Lynchburg, Virginia, not to be confused with Lynchburg, Tennessee, home of Jack Daniels. Totally different place. One of my favorite places on earth. But anyway, not sponsored. Anyway, he actually had a twin brother, Gene. They were born to Carrie Falwell and Helen Virginia Falwell. His father was actually a bootlegger at one time. And for those of you that don't know, that is somebody that makes illegal alcohol. Came to prominence during Prohibition, which would have been right around the time his father was probably into it. They're called, different things in different parts of the country. It was a lot more glamorous in Chicago where Al Capone was doing it. But here in the hills, the Appalachian Mountains, we just call them bootleggers or bathtub entrepreneurs. But that's what his father did. And he was also an agnostic, which that just means somebody that questions. That it's not somebody that has an opinion on the existence of a higher power. It's just somebody that just truthfully says, I don't know. His father, of course, did not raise his family overtly religious, but he did teach his son the value of a good hard day's work, which would come to benefit him later on. Actually, Jerry's grandfather went way beyond the label agnostic to atheist. So he had a very unique beginning to become what he became. So in 1958, he married his longtime wife, 𝗟𝗟. They were married their entire lives, and they had 2 sons, Jerry Jr., who also appears on this list, and Jonathan, as well as a daughter, Jeannie, who became a actual surgeon. So a highly educated family here. You have a lawyer and a pastor, and now a surgeon. So very, very educated family. A family that believed in education, which one of his great accomplishments was he did start a university, Liberty University, that we have done videos on before. But anyway, let's get into his past. After finishing high school in Brookville High School in Lynchburg, Virginia, he attended an unaccredited Baptist Bible College in Springfield, Missouri, graduating from there. And later on, he received 3 honorary doctoral degrees, a Doctor of Divinity from Tennessee Temple Theological Seminary, a Doctor of Letters from the California Graduate School of Theology, and a Doctor of Laws from Central University in Seoul, South Korea, which I still find very weird. But anyway, so his only college was actually an unaccredited Bible college. And if you are curious about how those types of colleges operate, I did an in-depth deep dive on Bible colleges, especially those that are approved by what is known as the American Quiverful movement. I'll link that video up here. Liberty University, his university, is covered within that. So I think it's very, very telling that that was the type of education that he received. Not long after graduating from Baptist Bible College, he started a Baptist church known as Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg. It is still in existence today. It was started with 35 members, where he simply preached an old school Southern Baptist type of message, which we're going to get into. It is now considered a mega church with thousands of members, as well as millions of people actually tuning in every week as part of the Old Time Gospel Hour, which was his nationally syndicated TV and radio show where you could see him every single Sunday. His youngest son, Jonathan, is now the senior pastor and also is the evangelist on the Old Time Gospel Hour, which he has actually changed to Thomas Road Live in reference to the church, I suppose, because of the controversy surrounding the Falwells. He had a very controversial beginning. Jerry Falwell was very much a segregationist. During his early ministry, the United States was embroiled in the African American civil rights movement, and he basically preached out and spoke out against Martin Luther King Jr., the act of integrating the schools, believing it was a travesty to both races to mix them in schools. He also founded Liberty Christian Academy, a private school for white students, not long after the founding of the actual Baptist church. And it remained a private school for many years, eventually evolving into Liberty University, which we will talk about. He did later come out and kind of backtrack on his segregationist beliefs, saying in the 80s and 90s that he was very wrong about his stance. And the Liberty Christian School, now known as Liberty Christian Academy, was made a co-ed multiracial, all races welcome private school that is still in existence and accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, and it is near the campus of Liberty University, which Falwell established with business partner Elmer L. Towns in 1971. It offers over 350 programs of study, both undergraduate and graduate. As I said, I have an in-depth video on these sorts of colleges right up here. It is fully accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools and the Association of Christian Schools International. So it has a regional accreditation, which is very unusual for these types of colleges. So I think he must have learned from the mistakes of the other colleges that he was associated with. The college today has approximately 13,000 students attending on campus and 90,000 students online. So it is a decent-sized university. It made headlines during COVID when it was one of the first colleges to return to on-campus classes in the midst of the pandemic, and has had a long, shaky history with the IRS, which we're about to talk about. The dissent, or what's a good way to say this, turmoil between Jerry Falwell and the United States government began in 1974. This was when the Internal Revenue Service were threatening to revoke the tax-exempt status of another Christian university known as Bob Jones University based on it forbade interracial dating between whites and any other race. This kind of drove Falwell crazy, as Liberty was founded on very similar things: no sex before marriage, no homosexual behavior, no interracial behavior. I don't think they actually admitted an African-American student until much later. But it was the IRS's crusade to kind of quell these schools that are, publicly accredited and receive federal student loan and federal student aid programs from having these types of rules. And as a result, Falwell, Pat Robertson, some other great evangelicals got heavily involved in the political process. And that brings us to the moral majority, which I'm sure you have heard of many, many times. But basically, Falwell and his fellow evangelicals got involved in this case, which was actually settled in 1978, when the federal court and the IRS stripped any institution that receives federal funds of their ability to receive federal funds and their tax-exempt status if they held segregationist views. This is based on the Brown versus Board of Education ruling. Now, of course, Falwell struck back. He made the very famous comment, "It's easier to start a brothel than a Christian school." However, I don't think it was your religion that was being questioned so much, Jerry, as the fact that you were kind of racist. So, if you want to start a school and have those types of rules and fund it as a private business, more power to you. I don't know who would go there. But the fact that you want the tax-exempt status of being a school and a religious organization, and the fact you want to receive, Title IV funds, kind of puts you at odds with the American taxpayer. And there are taxpayers of all creeds, religions, sexual orientations, whatever, in this country that don't want their money going to support an institution that might keep one of them out of it. Does that make sense, Jerry? So that's why these schools were stripped. It wasn't because they were Christian. It was because they were wanting federal help, federal assistance, federal funds, and were discriminating against people that paid the tax money that supported those breaks you were getting. It's very simple. I have crayons if you need an illustration of it, Falwell. Anyway. And it was because of Brown versus Board of Education and the 1978 federal ruling on the IRS rules that led all of these universities to allow people of all races in and to get rid of rules about interracial dating. So that's why they did it, for the federal money, not necessarily because they thought it was the right thing to do. However, I will say that Falwell came out later and said he was very wrong about a lot of this. So at least he admitted he made a mistake. However, Also, as a result of that ruling, we were stuck with the moral majority, which has become a huge voting bloc and political action bloc within conservative politics, i.e. mainly the Republican Party. So we are still stuck with the remains of that today, even though they are waning, but they are still a hugely pandered to voting bloc in a lot of conservative states, such as my own. I live in a red state. But it didn't stop Jerry Falwell. The fact that he had to fully integrate and bring his schools up to the times, as well as start preaching a more accepting message on the Old Time Gospel Hour, it did not stop him from joining up and going after even more entrepreneurial activities, as I'm sure he was taught by his father. So in 1987, he actually got involved with very shamed televangelist Jim Bakker, who I did a video on right up here. If you'll recall, Jim Bakker got involved in a sex scandal in the late 80s that, as well as a tax evasion and basically cattywampus financial deal involved with his amusement park, Heritage USA, and the PTO Club. Falwell kind of was tapped by Jim Bakker to help him lead the organization during these trying times. Basically what it was, Heritage USA was an amusement park. They sold basically timeshares where they promised all these people guaranteed rooms in a hotel, as well as reservations to everything in the park in trade for buying a timeshare or for a huge love gift to the PTO Club or Heritage USA. Well, turns out they didn't build enough rooms to accommodate and keep their promises. Somebody turned them in, and he got busted for it, along with sexual misconduct from a secretary that worked for him. But let's just say that Bakker tapped Falwell to temporarily lead his ministry while this was going on so that he could deal with the court and the jail time, and also a apparent cancer scare from his wife, Tammy. And Falwell stole it right out from under him. Oh, yeah. Falwell claims it was because it was him that saved the ministry, claiming that he himself raised $20 million to keep PTL and Heritage USA afloat. And it was him that saved it, that negotiated the deal where they later sold the rights to the PTL name to the Trinity Broadcasting Network. It was him that negotiated all this and actually kept this monstrosity afloat. And he was also noted for saying that Jim Bakker didn't lead it. He siphoned a lot of money off of it, and he saved it. And then Jim Bakker had the audacity to want a lifetime salary, a house, all this stuff. And I guess Falwell just told him to kick sand. So that's what happened. But of course, to hear Jim Bakker's tell a totally different story. But if you want to hear that entire story from Jim Bakker's perspective, that link is above. I don't think we need a revamp of all the scandals that Jerry Falwell Sr. was involved with. He had a huge disdain for homosexuals, calling them a plague on our society. Along with Pat Robertson, he blamed us for Hurricane Katrina. But his hatred goes back a lot further. He's always preached against it, as a lot of evangelicals do. But he also took up a kind of a saga or a self-imposed war against Ellen DeGeneres when she first came out as a lesbian in the 80s. He called her Ellen Degenerate. And then, of course, in the 90s, he said that Tinky Winky of the Teletubbies was actually gay and teaching children to be gay. Again, I have crayons if I need to explain to anybody in the Falwell family why that's not true. He's had several brushes with the IRS and the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, also known as the SEC, that investigated investigation of bonds issued by Falwell's incorporated entity that housed both the church and the university. He actually won that case, but it did leave a lasting blemish on the Old Time Gospel Hour and Thomas Road Baptist Church and Liberty University, because this SEC did frame them as fraudulent and misleading, saying that they didn't have the capital to pay back the bonds if the bonds were ever called. So, and then of course the other controversy is one that actually had a movie made about it. His $10 million lawsuit against Larry Flynt and Penthouse magazine, when Larry Flynt published a 2-page advertorial, kind of half advertisement, half editorial, basically saying that Jerry Falwell lost his virginity to his mother. As you know, it was fought all the way to the Supreme Court, and eventually Larry Flynt prevailed because it was protected under freedom of speech. However, turns out Falwell and Flynt were actually pretty good friends. Even though that happened, they actually got to know each other. Larry Flynt was, for a time, a follower of another televangelist. If you want me to do a deep dive on Larry Flynt, let me know down below. I'll be happy to. But he and Falwell had actually become very good friends. In fact, Larry Flynt was very distressed when he learned that Falwell had passed away May 15th, 2007. In fact, Larry Flynt was said to have paid toward Falwell's funeral expenses. But he died at the age of 73, and 𝗲𝗄𝗄, his wife, lived another 8 years, passing away in 2015. Liberty University was transferred to his son, Jerry Falwell Jr., who served as president. We're going to get into Jerry Falwell Jr. And Thomas Road Baptist Church and the Old Time Gospel Hour was given to his youngest son, Jonathan, who has since changed the name. So that's where Jerry Falwell Sr. ends and Jerry Falwell Jr. picks up. Let's dive into him. Jerry Falwell Jr. was born June 17th, 1962, to Jerry Sr. and 𝗲𝗄𝗀 Falwell in Lynchburg, Virginia. He attended mostly private schools, including Lynchburg Christian Academy, which, of course, was Jerry Falwell's private school, now called Liberty Christian Academy, as it wanted to shake away from its segregationist roots. He also attended Liberty University, also his father's college, where he obtained his Bachelor of Arts in History and Religious Studies in 1984, and then attended law school at the University of Virginia School of Law, and where he graduated in 1987. Immediately after he graduated from law school, he did serve in private practice in the Virginia area and as a lawyer for Liberty University. So he handled, just a general practice lawyer, also handling the legal cases of the university. And he was tapped to join the Board of Trustees of Liberty University in 2000. Why am I going so fast with Jerry Falwell? Because Jerry Falwell's saga really doesn't start until 2007 when his father, Jerry Sr., passed away. That's when he steps into prominence. So let's get into that. So in 2007, after Jerry Falwell's Sr.'s death, it was laid out in his will, in his plans, of just how everything he had built should be divided out. That is, Jerry Jr., who was a lawyer, had more business savvy, according to his father, would take over the presidency of Liberty University and the headmastership of Liberty Christian Academy, because he was the business guy. He was the education guy. Younger brother Jonathan, because he was more charismatic and wanted to be more of a preacher, he got Thomas Road Baptist Church and the Old Time Gospel Hour. So, but this alone left Falwell Jr. open for scrutiny, because there was a lot of detraction because of nepotism, plain and simple. You have a university that receives federal funding being passed from father to son as if it's a private entity. I mean, it is a private university, don't get me wrong, but it does take a tremendous amount of its revenue from taxpayer money because it participates in Title IV funding. And because of that, taxpayers have helped support that college, and now you have it being passed from father to son as if it's a private company that takes no public money. So a lot of investigations and a lot of scrutiny were piled on Falwell Jr. from the very beginning. And I don't even want to get into the the church and the old-time gospel hour being passed to the youngest son. Let's just concentrate on Jerry Jr. And so to combat some of this, Falwell Jr. actually established 2 LLCs where he kind of incorporated to handle deals for the university. So he kind of did some, shenanigans, which is smart business strategy, let's face it, to be able to continue to operate kind of as a university and kind of as a private business. So we didn't hear much from Falwell Jr., honestly, until Trump. I hate to keep bringing that up, but we didn't hear about it because even though Liberty University, of course, being a Christian school, bastion of conservatism, they've always had a huge conservative voice. They invite speakers from the conservative movement. But they did have Bernie Sanders there. So, I mean, they do offer their students some type of well-rounded education, but they were openly campaigning for Donald Trump. They came under a lot of scrutiny in both 2016 and 2019 for literally selling Trump paraphernalia at their campus bookstore. Supposedly, they were blocking columnists in the student newspaper from writing anything anti-conservative or anything anti-Trump. They also kind of skeptical of the fact that he was not only friends with Trump, he was also friends with Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education, which could also be kind of a conflict of interest, you think? But anyway, that all pales in comparison to what happened in 2019, where 2 different news agencies exposed 2 different Falwell Jr. scandals at the same time. They discovered a 2016 instance where the Liberty University sports facilities were transferred with no money paid in to Falwell's personal trainer. And then the university turned around and leased that from him to continue doing what they were doing with it. I didn't delve into that any further. Think what you will. And then later in 2019, Politico exposed a communication between Falwell and President Trump in which he asked for Michael Cohen, Trump's famous fixer, to help get rid of some photos that should be kept between a husband and a wife. And at least 3 of these photos were very compromising photos of his wife, Becky. Politico writer Brandon Ambrosino exposed what was going on at Liberty University. Not only was he asking Cohen to fix the situation for he and his wife, it also came to light due to the confessions of staff and faculty at Liberty University that Falwell was far too sherry with his personal life. He would talk about his wife's body. He would talk about his member size. I guess the dude was proud of it. I don't know. And he would also talk about how much he enjoyed sex with his wife, how he could nail his wife at any moment. That's literally something that he was quoted as saying. And that he really liked to share sexual shenanigans with the people that he worked with. And then on August 23rd, he actually made a public statement that he and his wife had a consensual affair with a young man that they met in Florida by the name of Giancarlo Granda. And basically this guy was a pool boy they had met while staying in Florida and had started kind of a business arrangement with him because, according to the Politico article, they funded his part ownership in a South Beach Italian restaurant, and Granda would actually introduce them as his business partners and his benefactors to his family and his friends, but then later on exposed by Reuters that he was actually one part of a throuple they had going on. According to Granda, he would consensually have relations with Becky Falwell while Jerry Jr. watched. There's a term for that, and it rhymes with cluck. But for about 2.5 years, this went on. And then supposedly Granda was trying, or somebody that had gotten a hold of these pictures that exposed everything, were trying to blackmail the Falwells. To this day, Jerry Falwell Jr. contends that he was not a willing participant in this affair, that his wife just had an affair and it was a very difficult time. But nevertheless, the scandal broke out, and as a result, he was asked to step down in 2019 as president of Liberty University, giving him a $10.5 million severance package. Remember, that's off the backs of taxpayers, because the majority of most colleges' money comes from taxpayer money in the form of federal student aid. Liberty University did open an investigation into both that as well as financial shenanigans, because they were concerned that it could potentially damage Liberty University's tax-exempt status, because it's a private religious institution. They announced that this leave of absence would be permanent, and Falwell actually sued Liberty University for defamation, but dropped the case in December of 2020. So that's kind of where we are. I know he's not quite a televangelist, but he is so tightly wound with televangelism, being the son of Jerry Falwell Sr. I thought it was definitely fun to dive into Jerry Jr. That leads us to our final televangelist that we're going to cover in this series, Joyce Meyer, born Pauline Joyce Hutchinson in St. Louis, Missouri in 1943. Her father was a World War II fighter pilot, and she has said many, many times that he has sexually abused her. So for that, she has my empathy. She has always kind of put herself out there as a champion of the working class. In fact, after high school, she did attend a technical program as part of her high school, O'Fallon Technical High School. She did marry a car salesman shortly after she graduated, and they only lasted about 5 years. She has said that that relationship was terrible, that her husband frequently cheated on her, and that she engaged in check hiding and stealing of money from her employer at the time so that her and her husband could go on vacations. She said that she later paid the money back after her divorce and apologized. She kind of became a bar hopper for a little while in her early 20s until she met her current husband, David Meyer, who was an engineer, and they were married in 1967. Joyce Meyer had been raised a Christian and said she remembers praying the salvation prayer at age 9. But then in 1976, about 9 years after her marriage to Meyer, she was praying intensely for God to show her the error of her ways, because David was a religious man. And she said while driving to work one morning, she audibly heard God speak her name. And then that had her a renewed faith, and she decided at that moment that she had been called to preach. And boy, did she. She started trying to get herself a church, for lack of a better term. Her and David were members of a St. Louis Lutheran church, but she said that she immediately knew that that wasn't the correct way, because she believed in the gifts of the Spirit, which ties in very nicely with the whole, prosperity gospel, the speaking in tongues, that good stuff. So she started leading a interdenominational Bible class at a local cafeteria, and became active in Life Christian Center, which is a charismatic evangelical Pentecostal church in Fenton, Missouri. Within a few years, she had worked herself up to associate pastor within the church, and then she kind of became kind of a fixture at the church, which helped that church grow to one of the leading charismatic churches in the Missouri area, largely because of her popularity as a Bible teacher. She also got a 15-minute daily radio station broadcast that she started preaching and teaching with her her audience of choice being women. Either married, single, doesn't matter. But that's what her whole point was, because she wanted to empower women, she said. So she started putting her full focus into that, but then came into conflict with some of the higher ups at the church, at Life Christian Center, who, thought maybe she was getting a little overboard. So in 1985, she resigned and founded her own ministry, initially called Life in the Word, but eventually just renamed as Joyce Meyer's Ministry. And she began syndicating her radio show out to Chicago and Kansas City as well. In 1993, her husband Dave suggested she go to television, which she did. She basically started on TBS, the Turner Broadcasting System, and was broadcast initially on Chicago TBS affiliates as well as BET. And then that program has grown into her weekly television show, Enjoying Everyday Life, and it's still on the air today. She published her first book in 2002 and was paid over $10 million to write it. Like most televangelists, a lot of her scandals have revolved around money. The IRS launched a 2004 investigation into Joyce Meyer's ministry to see exactly how these tax-free funds were flowing. Basically, according to Meyer, she funneled all the profits from her books, which she's written way more than 100 by now. Her books, her speaking engagements, her television program, that all of that funneled through her ministry. And from that, she took a salary of $900,000 a year, while her husband, David, who is her business manager, took $450,000. And the IRS was questioning that. So to kind of settle the case, she said that she took a salary reduction, no hint on how much that salary reduction was for both her and her husband, but in exchange, she would no longer funnel as much of her book royalties, speaking engagement royalties, all of that into the ministry, and that would go directly to her to settle that case. But probably the most damaging thing to come out of that was a grade of C by Financial Ministry Watch magazine, which kind of looks at churches, looks at religious organizations to see if they're really worthy of tax-exempt status. She was one of 6 televangelists actually investigated by the United States Senate, but nothing ever came of that because it never does. And finally, the most eye-popping scandal to ever hit Joyce Meyer's ministry was honestly no fault of hers. It really wasn't. In 2009, her head of security, Christopher Coleman, and I did an entire episode on this case, and I'll link it above, was actually convicted of murdering his wife, Sherry, and their 2 sons in cold blood so that he could be with his ministry. And according to him, his motivation was that if he confessed to having an extramarital affair, he could lose his 6-figure job with Joyce Meyer's Ministries because they frown on divorce. Even though this was not directly Joyce's fault, her ministry was rocked for it, and it took her several years to recover. The suit that was filed against Joyce Meyer's by the victim's family, Sherry Coleman's family, was dismissed in 2013, but it was a wrongful death suit alleging that the minister's stance on things like that led to their daughter's death. But she has shaken all of that off. She is still on television, on radio, on the internet. You can find her all over YouTube, and she is still preaching her prosperity gospel of name it and claim it to women, because women do 60% of the purchasing in this country. So she has her shtick down. And I'm not even going to talk about the bad plastic surgery. I'm just not. I'm not going to get into ad hominem attacks here. But anyway, that is Joyce Meyer. And with that concludes part 3 of our series on televangelists. I know I didn't get them all. I don't know if I could ever get them all, but I'll do another one a few months down the road and try to bring in some more. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time. Keto and crime.